Hi. How's it going? Good. Oh, somebody back there is really good. That makes me so happy. My name is Fitz. I am the family ministry pastor here at Kingsburg. It's good to be with you. A couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to travel with 20 some odd of our students and several adults to Washington, D.C. For a missions experience there, and we served with our missions organization, CSM, there in the city, along with other organizations. Our students worked really hard, did a great job. We pulled weeds at a monastery that provided food for different food banks and whatnot, farmers markets, things like that. We did some work for senior citizens. We pulled off a vacation Bible school for kids in Ward 8 there in D.C. It was awesome being with this group of primarily students who were loving Jesus and doing something about it. It also allowed me to reflect on the first time I took a group of students to Washington, D.C. on a missions experience 13 years ago. I was a student pastor in Missouri. That trip could best be characterized as an unmitigated disaster. And you might be thinking, that's super harsh. Like, how can you talk about a mission trip that way? Here's how. We had five, it started the day before the trip, actually. We had 5 15-passenger vans reserved for that trip and another trip we were going on the same week, and we showed up at the rental agency, and they had, like, 0 15-passenger vans. So, like, right off the bat, we're off to a super good start. So they gave us a bunch of SUVs and minivans for our trip. So the next morning, we headed out on our 15-hour 2-day journey, which was just stupid for me to plan that in the first place. That was just dumb, okay? About an hour and a half into that trip, one of the vehicles, mine, stopped working so much. And so I had to take a side trip to the Louisville airport to swap it out, just adding more time to the trip, because 15 hours, not enough. So we got there. During our first meal, 2 of my adult leaders, a married couple, get ready for this. This might be trigger warning. 2 of my adult leaders found out that their dog back home had suddenly and tragically died. This was like their first child, if you will. We're off to an awesome start. We go through the week. We had relational conflict between one of our students and one of our adult leaders. And a lot of it boiled down to this particular student had some developmental disorders that we were unaware of. And if we had known, we would have been able to interpret some of his behaviors and things like that better and handle it differently. 2 of our vehicles got broken into during that week. And the icing on the cake, one of my adult leaders got detained by the police at Reagan International Airport because he was parked or pulled over in an area he wasn't supposed to be in. And when he was approached by the officer and asked to produce ID, he had to inform them that it had just gotten stolen out of his broken into van. So he got to spend some time in the holding cell in Reagan International Airport. Like I said, I didn't overstate it when I said an unmitigated disaster. And you hear that and you think, why would you take students back there again? Why did you not quit student ministry then and there? I'm stubborn or stupid, one of the two, and I just wanted to redeem that particular experience. And when we returned from that fateful trip, we felt a little bit like Chippy the parakeet. And you're like, who the heck is Chippy the parakeet? Max Lucado tells the story about Chippy the parakeet in one of his books. Chippy the parakeet was just living an ordinary parakeet life when Chippy's owner decided to clean Chippy's cage. So the owner took the attachment off of the hose, stuck the vacuum cleaner in the cage, and was vacuuming away. The phone rang, and all of a sudden, you guessed it, sucked Chippy right up into the vacuum. Well, this is so ridiculous. So the owner's like, oh no, what have I done? So opens up the vacuum cleaner bag, and there is Chippy just stunned, covered in dust and dirt, So quick thinking, the owner grabbed Chippy, ran to the bathroom faucet, turned on the water, and stuck Chippy under the water. Like, clean my bird off. And now she pulls Chippy out, and Chippy's freezing. And so Chippy's owner does what any caring parakeet owner would do. Turns on the hair dryer and blasts Chippy in the face with the hair dryer. Poor little Chippy did not know what hit him. The owner, actually a reporter called the owner a couple days after this occurrence just to check, how's Chippy doing? And the owner said, Chippy doesn't sing much anymore. He just sits and stares. Can you relate? Can you relate to this? Like when I returned from this disastrous trip to Washington, D.C., and Chippy, we have something in common. We had great plans. I had plans to take students to Washington, D.C., to impact the community there, to take my students one step closer to Jesus. Chippy had plans to live a happy parakeet life, have a parakeet family, maybe fly free someday. I don't know, whatever parakeets look for. And at the end of the day, all we could do was sit and stare. And every single person in this room, every single person watching online has had this experience. You know what I'm talking about. You've made plans that have been detoured, that have gotten derailed, that have crumbled completely altogether. You made plans to go on a trip this summer, and illness or injury forced you to put those plans on hold. Or maybe you decided, I need to buy a new car, I need to get a new vehicle to get me to and from. Some bills came pouring in, and you're like, I gotta push pause on that particular plan. Maybe you decided it was time to stop renting. I'm going to buy a house now. And then you found out houses are stupid expensive right now. And so you had to push pause on that. Or maybe the plans that have gotten derailed for you are even more significant. Maybe your plans to start a family, to get pregnant, to start having kids, maybe to adopt, maybe to change careers, maybe to retire. You've had plans that have gotten derailed. As a great Jewish theologian Woody Allen once said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. And if we rewind the clock 2,000 years, Paul, the great early church leader, experienced the same thing as well. And we're continuing this journey through the book of Acts, following Paul as he travels around the Mediterranean region, telling folks about Jesus and inviting them into the Jesus life. And today we're going to be in Acts chapter 28. If you brought a Bible with you, a physical Bible, Acts is found in the New Testament, the right section of the Bible. Acts 28 is the last chapter of the Bible. Or you can use a Bible app, or the words will be behind me. And so we'll start in Acts chapter 28, verse 1, which says, after reaching land safely, we learned that the island was called Malta. Now, let's pause right away. After reaching land safely, it's important to mention that Malta was not in Paul's plans. It wasn't in Paul's plans. This was not Luke's way. Luke, who wrote the book of Acts, this was not Luke's way of saying he got there okay, like you would do with your kids. Text me when you get there so I know you got there okay. I got there okay, Dad. Now quit bothering me. This was not that situation, right? He was actually headed to Rome. This was already a disruption in his plans. He was headed to Rome, a more influential city, that he was going to tell people about Jesus. However, that significant disruption popped up, specifically being a shipwreck. If you go back one chapter to chapter 27, we see that Paul and the other prisoners that were on board were involved in a shipwreck, and they all either swam or floated to shore holding on to planks of wood a la Rose in Titanic. Let's not skim over the fact that it says Paul and the other prisoners. Paul was a prisoner. I think it's safe to say that this was not in his plans when he started following Jesus. He didn't go, I'm going to follow Jesus, I'm going to rile everything up so I get thrown in prison. Nobody does that. He probably thought that was a possibility, but it was not a part of his plans. And so here he is, shipwrecked as a prisoner. We're off to a good start already. However, things turn out okay for the time being. Verse 2 tells us the islanders showed us extraordinary kindness. Because it was rainy and cold, they built a fire and welcomed all of us. So Paul and his companions probably breathing a sigh of relief at this point. Like there's a break from all of the catastrophes. Well, that window, that brief respite, closes rather quickly, as it often does in our lives. Verses 3 and 4. Paul gathered a bunch of dry sticks and put them on the fire. As he did, a poisonous snake, driven out by the heat, latched onto his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer. He was rescued from the sea, but the goddess Justice hasn't let him live." Everything's good, everything's great. We're having s'mores by the fire, and all of a sudden the snake pops up out of nowhere and latches itself onto Paul's hand. Not part of the plan. But it only gets worse. Not only does he literally have a snake hanging from his hand. I've thought about bringing a prop snake, but some of you would freak out and leave, and I want you to stay. Not only does he have a snake literally hanging from his hand, now the islanders are blaming him for it, saying he must be a murderer. That's why the snake bit him. Super weird connection, right? Doesn't make sense in our minds. But it does make sense in their minds. There was a prevalent theological mindset at the time that they ascribed to. And we talked about it a few weeks ago. And that was that if good things happen to you, the gods must be pleased with you. If bad things happen to you, like a snake biting you, the gods must be displeased with you. You must have done something to upset the gods. And that's how the islanders viewed the circumstances in their lives and in the life of Paul. And this mindset continued to be obvious in what happened next. Paul shook the snake into the fire and suffered no harm. They expected him to swell up with fever or suddenly drop dead. After waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and began to claim that he was a god. So Paul has experienced something good. He didn't get sick. He didn't die. So naturally, he must be a god. Naturally. We would all go there, right? If something good happens to you, you must be a god. That's how they viewed things. Paul's journey through the Mediterranean region had all sorts of ups, but had lots of downs as well, didn't it? We've talked about it over the last few weeks. His plans could best be viewed this way. These are Paul's plans that he has for his life and for his journey. I knew I was going to have trouble with that one. There's his plans. Very few of his plans came to fruition as he envisioned them. And you know what this feels like, don't you? You have your own plans. And you've seen this happen. We've all experienced this. And when that happens, when our plans get dismantled, when our plans get shredded in this way, we can view any range of emotions from annoyance to frustration, sadness, anger. And if we're not careful, we can take it one step further and put a theological mindset on it, much like the Maltons did. And when we do that, we assign the wrong message to our circumstances. See, when our plans get disrupted or derailed, oftentimes we view it like Ralphie did in A Christmas Story. Do you remember A Christmas Story? Say yes. The greatest Christmas movie of all time. No arguments. Okay? Somebody's arguing with me. Ushers. Ralphie, you might remember the scene where he got a decoder ring. In this movie, there was a secret message read over the Little Orphan Annie radio hour. And so he got a decoder ring from his Ovaltine in order to read the secret message that was read over the radio, which was just an advertisement for Ovaltine. And so he was super discouraged, super disillusioned. But we do this. We view the circumstances in our lives, we view the shredded plans in our lives through a secret decoder ring. We strive to interpret what God is trying to tell us through life's ups and downs. The islanders viewed a snake bite and the resulting lack of illness through a theological mindset, through a theological decoder ring. If bad things happen, it's because of the gods. If good things happen, it's because of the gods. So what are the gods trying to tell us? And it sounds super primitive. And yet we do the same thing. We do the exact same thing. We just verbalize it differently. When we do it, it sounds like it must not be what God wanted because God closed the door. Life got hard because God closed the door on that. Or it must have been God's will, it must have been God's desire for my life because God opened all sorts of doors for me. God confirmed this decision because look at how well it's played out in my life. Or I must have chosen poorly because look at how life has turned out since then. Do any of those sound familiar to you? I'd venture to say that you or someone you know has said something similar to them. And what we're really saying is, because things are good in my life, I must be smack dab in the center of God's will. Or, if things are bad in my life, I must have displeased God in some way. Or God must be directing me to something else. But I wonder if what we're actually doing is just mistaking happiness for blessing. Maybe it's not God confirming anything. Maybe it's just that something good happened to you. Now, my degree in college was in radio television production. Didn't use the degree a day in my life. It's fine. I'm not bitter. During that degree program, we had to study journalism. So we had to learn how to write articles and how to write copy for broadcasts. Now, the most eye-catching piece of the article, the one that's going to catch the reader's attention and encourage them to read on through the article, it's usually in bigger print, is called the headline. Right, it is the headline. And then when you're writing, you might find another piece of information that doesn't really fit into the article anywhere, so you might insert a footnote. And that piece of information might help you understand the article a little bit better or give credence to the article. When we look at the circumstances in our lives, particularly the failed circumstances in our lives, and read God's blessing into them, we're giving the circumstances the headline, when in reality, they may only deserve a footnote. So the headline reads, "Life is good. God must be pleased." Or the circumstances might be really bad, so we mistakenly ascribe the headline, "God is moving me to something else." And the reality is there's very little theological backing for this kind of thinking. So let's not give the circumstances in our lives the headline when in reality they may only deserve the footnote. See, the problem comes when we take this line of thinking. It could actually derail us from what God wants to do in and through our lives. If we flip over to 2 Corinthians, just a couple of books to the right, Paul lists what he's experienced as an apostle of Jesus Christ. And listen to this list. I've been imprisoned. I've been beaten more times than I can count. I faced death many times. I received the 40 lashes minus one from the Jews 5 times. I was beaten with rods 3 times. I was stoned once. I was shipwrecked 3 times. I spent a day and night on the open sea. I've been on many journeys. I faced dangers from rivers, robbers, my people, and Gentiles. I faced dangers in the city, in the desert, on the sea, and from false brothers and sisters. I faced these dangers with hard work and heavy labor, many sleepless nights, hunger and thirst, often without food, and in the cold without enough clothes. And so I wonder, what if Paul had taken this theological mindset with the circumstances in his life? any one of these situations would have been fodder for him to say, God's displeased with me, or God is redirecting me to something else, or to just bail altogether. And if he had done that, where would we be? Like, the entire face of Christianity would look different than it does right now. Each of the early disciples faced many hardships as they started the early church. And any of those could have been interpreted as God closing the door to this path in their lives. But here's the thing, hardships, it's part of being human. It's just what we sign up for, being human. But we are here because those first followers of Jesus did not interpret those circumstances in their lives through that theological decoder ring. One more example. While on earth in human form, Jesus himself was functioning smack dab in the center of God's will, of God's design for his life. Does anyone want to argue that? Don't argue that one, okay? I think it's safe to assume that he was. Did he face some things that could be interpreted as God closing the door or God redirecting his path? Absolutely. Opposition abounded. The religious leaders always giving me a hard time. God must be telling me to do something else. These people are leading me up to the edge of a cliff and trying to push me off. God's trying to tell me to redirect me to go do something else. Arrested, falsely tried. I must not be following God's plan for my life. But Jesus refused to interpret the circumstances in his life through this decoder ring. He refused to give those circumstances the headline, and thank God that he did. So if God didn't necessarily illuminate Paul's path through difficult circumstances or good circumstances, and he didn't do that through Jesus, why do we think he's going to do it with us? Like, I don't think that's how God operates. Good things happen. Bad things happen. That's the part of the world that we live in. So if we can't read into the tea leaves of the changing circumstances of our lives to determine God's will, to determine God's blessing, how do we do it then? Well, to answer that question, I want to rewind to the life of Elijah very briefly. Just before this series, we did a series on the lives of Elijah and Elisha, two Old Testament prophets. If you missed any of those, you can go to our YouTube channel and catch up on those. But in this particular story, Elijah is running from Queen Jezebel. She wants him dead. And so he's running and he's hiding in a cave. And the Lord meets him there. And the Lord called him out of the cave, and we read that a very strong wind tore them through the mountains and broke apart the stones before the Lord. But the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord wasn't in the fire. And after the fire, there was a sound, thin, quiet. Elijah could have very easily given the wind the headline. He very easily could have given the earthquake or the fire the headline. But those were the footnotes. The thin, quiet sound. Or as other translations say, the quiet whisper. That was the headline. Because that was where God was found. Now, the Fitzpatrick family, we have several smart speakers scattered throughout our house. Do you have the smart speakers, the Echoes, or the other kinds of smart speakers? Nobody. Sweet. This is going to go well. But we have several of them, and frequently I will find myself in my kitchen with music playing or something playing on one of the speakers, doing dishes, cleaning up the kitchen. So I've got music playing, I got water running, I got dishes clanging and banging, and my wife or kids, Marcy or the kids, will be in the living room, and oftentimes one of them will say something to me. And thanks to the music, thanks to the water, the dishes, and the fact that my ears are not young, I can't hear what they're saying at all. But what's the most important thing to listen to? Is it Hamilton on my speaker?
Is it the water or the clanging dishes? No, it's my family. My family is the most important thing to listen to, even if they're not the loudest. If we want to be able to determine how God is moving, how God is leading, whether or not God is redirecting us in light of the changing circumstances in our lives, we have to listen. Not to the noisy clang of the failed plans in our lives, because that's still going to be there. But we need to listen to the still, small voice of God, because that's the important voice to listen to, even if it's not always the loudest. So how do we do that? How do we get there? I want to give you three suggestions. Three suggestions today. First suggestion is make space. How much space do you have in your life? Between family and work and working out and shopping and doing the bills and running kids to this activity, how much space do you leave to simply be alone with God and to just listen? Not to sit with God and listen to worship music, not to sit with God and to read a devotional book, but to sit with God and just listen. We need to make space. And it won't come naturally. It won't come easy because the noise in our lives, it's really loud and it's really addictive and we're super used to it. But nothing worth it ever comes easy. So I would encourage you, get alone. Be silent. Turn off your phone completely. Not just on silent mode, but like off completely. Take it to another room, put it in a drawer, and really get alone and be quiet so you can hear from God. Fitz, I can only do that for like 2 minutes. Awesome. Start there. Start with 2 minutes. Do 3 minutes next week. Spend some time. Make some space in your life. Second, pay attention to how God has created you. Listen to yourself, basically. Paul knew who he was. He was a challenger who was transformed by Jesus to change the world and to reach the world for Jesus. And he didn't opt out of that when things went sideways because he knew who he was. He knew how God had created him. So, who are you? Have you done the work to figure out who you are and how God has created you? Well, yeah, I'm a dad, I'm a spouse, I work at such, no. Who are you in here? Like, how has God created you? Maybe it requires talking to a counselor, or maybe it just requires taking some inventories of some sort to figure out who you are. A couple of popular ones are like a spiritual gift inventory. Where are my spiritual gifts that I can use to impact the church in a positive way? Myers-Briggs, anyone hear of Myers-Briggs? A couple of you, yeah. So maybe you come home from a party and you're just like exhausted. And you're like, why am I exhausted? Well, you do the Myers-Briggs and find out you're an introvert and you don't get energy from that. Okay, and that's why you're exhausted. Myers-Briggs, Strengths Finder, figure out what you're strong at and operate out of those strengths. My personal favorite is one called the Enneagram. Anyone know the Enneagram? Yeah, oh, my people. Yay. The Enneagram, and it's just a personality typing inventory that it helps you figure out who you are, how you operate in this world, how you've learned to survive, how you operate when you're healthy and when you're unhealthy. And that's my favorite. That's done the most good for me. So those are just some ways that you can do some hard work to figuring out exactly who you are. And then the third thing is, what has God placed on your heart? What has God placed on your heart? Maybe it's caring for the poor. Maybe it's adoption and foster care. Maybe it's writing and communication. Maybe it's working with animals. Maybe it's educating the next generation. Whatever that is, whatever that thing that you are passionate about, that really gets your juices flowing, that you would do even if you never got paid for it a day in your life. What is that thing that you care about, that you're passionate about? Theologian Frederick Buechner once wrote, "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." And what happens is when you do the hard work of getting still to listen to God and to yourself, it right-sizes all of the voices in your life. It puts the sometimes still, small voice of God in its rightful place as the headline, reducing all of the noisy, failed plans to the footnote. James in chapter 1 writes, "But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed about by the wind." When we allow all of the circumstances in our lives to raise to the level of being the headline, we are on the ocean, just bouncing back and forth by the wind. But I don't desire that for you. I desire for stability, the stability that comes from taking that still small voice of God and putting in the headline of your life. I do not, this is going to be surprising, I do not know everything. But what I do know is God has awesome plans for your life. And He doesn't want those to get derailed just when things get hard, when things are difficult. So my prayer for you today is that you would do the hard work of listening to God and listening to yourself so that God's voice remains in the place of the headline. Would you pray with me? God, every person in this room, every person online has a story. Every person has a plan that they had mapped out that went south in some way, shape, or form. And maybe they're walking through it right now. And God, help us. It's really easy to read into that you're trying to direct us to something else. Maybe you are. But I think in most cases you're not. Those are just a sign that life is hard. And so I pray you would encourage us. Encourage us with your voice, your still small voice. May we listen to that instead of all the noisy failed plans in our lives, because we want to follow hard after you regardless of what comes our way, regardless of what shots come our way, regardless of how our plans get shredded and thrown to the ground. We want to follow after your voice. So help us to hear from you. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Couple of pieces of housekeeping before I let you go. First of all, our new senior pastor is going to be here in a couple weeks, and I am pumped. And he wants to meet you. He wants to meet all of you. And so we have several opportunities for meet and greets. We're calling Meet the Millers, which is their last name. And so a couple ways that you can sign up for those. We have a limited number of slots at each one because he wants to make sure that he and his wife want to make sure that they're able to have FaceTime with all of you. That's why they're doing several of them and limiting the number. A couple ways you can do that. You can go to Ginghamsburg.org/meetthemillers, sign up there. If you've got a smartphone pointed at that QR code we're always talking about in the seat backs in front of you, that will take you there and you can register there. Or you can go out to the lobby, take a right when you go out this way. There's a little black desk and somebody will be there to help you sign up for one of those meet and greets. Again, Pastor Miller and Rachel Miller really want to meet with you. Tim, can you bring that up here? Awesome, thank you. So I talked about a couple ways you can learn about yourself. One, we talked about being quiet, being able to listen to God, and what a really cool book that we like to advocate. It's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and there's some parts in here that are going to help you listen well to God. Does anybody want this? Oh, okay, yeah, come on up here. I saw your hand first. There you go. You take that one. You have to promise me to read it. And I'm going to need a book report in 3 weeks. Okay. Also talked about Strengths Finder. That's this book here. It talks all about the strengths, and there's a super secret code in here for you to be able to take the Strengths Finder inventory to figure out who you are and what you're strong at. Anybody want this? Anybody want? Oh, come here. Yeah, come on. Here you go. I'd throw it, but it's hardback, and that's going to hurt somebody. Okay. Some of my favorite. Okay, this one's about the Enneagram. This is so good. there's too much good things to say, so I'm just going to say, who wants this? Because this is the best one. Okay, come on. All right, awesome. I'm going to set it here so I can let these people know. Okay, I'll hand it to you. Is this awkward for anyone else? Just me? Okay. Awesome. That's all I have. And so here's what I want to say is, have an awesome week. Listen to God. Listen to yourself. We'll see you next Sunday. Bring somebody with you. See you later.
Grudges won't let go of an old hurt. Anger don't accept apologies. Judgment don't listen to reason. Hopelessness won't comfort the lonely. But this one thing I know for sure. This one thing I know for sure. Love will, love will, love will, love will. What goes deeper than the wound that time won't heal? Love will, love will. Pride never chooses the low road. Jealous ain't content with what it's got. Impatience won't delay for any reason. Selfish